As a group of diverse artists, we decided to embark on a project that would be highly collaborative and thematic in nature. What drew me to suggest Penelope as our theme was the fact that her story is such an iconic myth, and waiting is such a universal condition. When things are shifting in your life, and you know that you are going to take a new direction, but it's not yet quite the right time. You have the energy building in you, but it's not yet time to bear fruit. You are sitting there, and still things happen. The wait is active because there is energy. Buds are turning into leaves. Waiting is really an intimate process.
Yes.
It's really a personal process. However, you can share it. It can become communal. You're in a hospital waiting room, and although it is about you, you have people there who witness and share your wait. Even though they cannot go through it for you, they honor your wait by being there. That too is intimate and personal, yet communal and shared.
We got together collaboratively to decide on the premise, which was the story of Penelope, and then we all went away and we had to individually contemplate what our stories were, and we had to think about what experience from our life of waiting we wanted to use as our story.
Between pivotal moments or events that you know are going to happen is when waiting takes place. I'm trying to make a subject of waiting relevant to me. And that link between procreation and ceramics was the idea that vessel forms have been around for thousands and thousands of years, as humans have been. To me is the ultimate waiting when you dig a pot out of the ground and, it's been sitting under the ground waiting to be dug up,
Why is there that transference? Why do I do that? And if I bring the energy back, what does it sort of wake up in me? Where does it resonate? When I did art therapy in the seniors' home, it's a lovely care facility. Everyone knows that they're going to die, and they know why they're there, and yet you're not allowed to talk about death. What could be more important for them than to talk about the next
journey?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And yet they can't. And so what happens to when your waiting isn't witnessed, this sense, when it's not honored?
Something my mother used to always say, it passes the time. Yeah. And it was like, she would play cards, or she would play solitaire by herself, or she would watch TV, and it was like waiting to die.
Your mother's personal sort of relationship with time had such an impact on you. When we think that we're waiting on our own, we're not. It actually, the repercussions of that waiting touches a lot of people around us.
We were each given 30 pieces of paper to begin with, where we had to start a drawing or start our imagery, put something down on the paper.
And then we went away again individually with our 30 pieces of paper, and we started to put down the first images that were the beginnings of each of our stories. And then we came together collaboratively again, and we shared all of our stories, and that was a very impactful meeting. Talked about what we had done, and we exchanged pieces. And then we went back to our own studios again, worked individually, and added our layers of stories. And we did this quite a number of times throughout the 3 years that we worked on this project, so that these pieces have become very layered and rich with everybody's images on it. And it was in this way of going away and working individually and also coming together and working collaboratively and doing the exchange that all of our images started to come together, and all of our stories got interwoven like a tapestry on paper.
Working together with the collective on this project, I have to say I considered myself to be more of a collaborator than a curator. It was a bit different than a normal curating process, where in this instance I was involved in the project from the very beginning and spent more time offering advice, working as a sounding board, sometimes helping them to work through some of the thematic issues, as well as sorting through the work.
For me, the idea of working with other artists in a collaboration was pretty interesting, since I've grown up alone with my art. It was a challenge to take on the collaboration, but one that I was really excited to do. Everyone thought that my theme of my mother waiting for the inevitable was the best idea, and one that I did really want to delve into, and one that I pursued. My mother was an extremely productive person. She was very creative, and she spent most of her life making beautiful things. So in her later years, when I found her in her aloneness in her apartment playing solitaire and winding down, I didn't take to it very easily, and she would say, well, it helps to pass the time, which made me crazy. And but now I understand it more. I like the connection to the weaving and the weaving of the knitting, etc. I think as an artist I found it really exciting. I loved it. I found my painting changed a lot, my drawing changed a lot. I got totally engrossed in it, and I even found myself taking on pieces in our meetings when we came together that I would look at and I'd think that would be a real challenge. That's just the way I do things.
See that I have a real passion for vessels. I've always been in love with ceramics and printmaking. If you look through history, certain shapes are repeated again and again. And part of that is that there's a sort of natural structure that is appealing to the human eye. I think they're indicative to the human form. In a sense, I look at objects as holders of memories, or they help me remember things that are significant to me and to that other person. For me, what it is it's this, the objects are silent observers of people's lives. You have that fragment or that piece or that memory, so you look at that object, it reminds you of the person that's significant to you. There's a visceral reaction you have when you hold that object or look at it. It has in a sense, a soul. You know, when you look at vessels, if you look at Greek forms, vessels have these big bellies and these little feet and these, you know, and they refer back, I think, really to fertility and to birth and to the womb, very similar to a vessel form. So it references back to the idea of fertility.
The interesting thing I found about collaborating was that you had to draw deep in your resources because you were already being forced into going in directions you wouldn't naturally have gone on. There's a lot of trust involved in collaboration, and there are times, unfortunately, when you take that wrong road, and in those cases, when it becomes throwaway, it almost becomes more exciting because you can't do any wrong anymore, and so you can push in directions you wouldn't have ever gone in. In the end, you want to make a good image. I always work with icons, and so I use the rocking chair because I thought that was a great icon for waiting, because you're sitting there, you think you're doing something, you're going back and forth, but you're actually getting nowhere. There is a lot that we do during the wait. So that was kind of my idea at first of who I am when I wait. I'm just in this kind of pattern of rocking pattern. I was at the PNE with my daughter. We were at the horse stalls, and I was watching the horses waiting to go out to perform. That's more how I feel when I'm waiting off, and let me out, let me do something, get me back in action. And so the horse imagery came in, and I wasn't interested in the rocking horse idea, again going nowhere, but that idea of tension and the energy that the horse has, just waiting to be let out. So that's why the horse imagery kind of developed from the rocking chair. At the end, in wait, whatever works, whatever gets that story across, you do it.
My work's about growth and transformation that happens behind the visible world. It deals with roots growing and neurons connecting and cells dividing, memories being stored, and without anyone witnessing it, but it's there, it has happened. Then at some point you just realize that psychological and physical transformation, that it's taken place, and things have changed. Some patterns have formed, or something in the darkness has been born, has grown, and that can sustain life. It can be in the real dark solitude moments, even lonely moments, when things like that occur. And I just wanted to bring forth the idea that the inception is outside of you. There's all this activity inside of you that's happening simultaneously that corresponds to the outside act of waiting.
My in-wait story came about when a family member was diagnosed with a terminal illness. We waited for doctor's appointments, we waited for her prognosis, we waited for her chemo treatment, and then ultimately we just waited to see what would be. And there was a very profound sense of waiting during the 1 year from diagnosis to my sister's imminent death. During that year, my sister and I each searched for balance and inner peace in very different ways. And I found it interesting that my sister, in knowing that her physical time was limited, turned to very physical activities to cope with her illness as it progressed, and she started to belly dance. I, on the other hand, felt a very strong need to go inward, and I became much more meditative in my attempt to cope with the situation. My in-wait imagery looks at and explores the roles we play and the symbiotic relationships that develop as we face our and our loved ones' mortality. For this project, I asked, how do we live as we're waiting to die? So in my imagery, you will see drawings of dancing feet, of close-ups of still feet, and this was very symbolic of my sister's tentative connection to the earth. You'll also see images of lotus flowers and upturned palms and offering bowls, which represented my search for balance and inner peace throughout this ordeal. There's also a recurring image of a tree trunk with very strong roots, which was how I visualized myself trying to be strong and grounded so that I could help my sister. Near the end of the project, I began to draw my sister's funeral urn, which was the culmination of my and my sister's in-wait story.
Most artists are really hesitant to do collaborative work, and and part of it, I think, is that we get attached to our work, we get attached to our pieces, and I think that it takes a lot of strength to be able to do pieces and pass that on to somebody else to finish for you. In the beginning, we'd get together every month and we'd pass our pieces around and come and go off with the work. At home, they would start to figure out what they want to do with the work. Then what ended up happening is people started to become really familiar with the way that people would interact with the pieces. You'd get together and as a group, you'd actually decide who best should take this piece. Having done this project, I think is an incredible, amazing thing, because somebody may solve your visual idea or what you're trying to do in a different way than you do. So it became a community decision on who should take the piece. And I passed that on to somebody else, and they solved that visual problem in a completely different way than I would have solved that. For me, I would draw a pot or paint a pot on a piece of paper, and then or a shell. And you look at what they've done, and it's like, wow, this is a really interesting way of finishing visual story that I started. It starts a whole other set of dialogues or visual images flowing through your mind. It's still relevant to your own body of work, but it's just a fresh perspective. I find in this act of collaboration, it expands your repertoire of the way you approach creating your own images.
What I really liked about the project was that it really challenged the way I work. It just opened it up. I think I'm gonna using a lot of the insights that I gained in this project in my future works. This sort of made me move outside of that and experiment and also play. That's what I really liked about this project, was that even though it was really serious and heartfelt, it was playful. There was a real sense of community and real sense of support, and I really enjoyed that. It provided a container for working in ways that allowed me to transmute a lot of the material that I was preoccupied with. When I look back at this, I'll probably see that it's been one of the fundamental things that will change my art making.
I think I'll bring up the knitting needles.
I think that's a good idea, right? And then I don't think it needs anything else necessarily.
No, well, it's getting a little congested in there.
When two or more artists start working together, the sum, the result, is quite often something that none of us would have come to individually. So the result is sort of greater than the sum of all of our work.
I think the hardest thing for me was to put marks on a piece of someone else's imagery, because I was scared that they would think that I don't think that that particular mark that they had made was an important mark. It was an important mark for me, but by the method of using lithography or printmaking, you put layers on top of layers on top of layers, and what I was trying to do is push some things back and pull some things forward. And one of my metaphors, which was flowers, I wanted it to make a statement as well as to have the beauty of the other person's work behind me. When it became complicated, when it passed back and forth between one artist and the other, or it went to another artist and then it came back to me, because all of a sudden you have 3 or 4 different definitions of in weight. So what was I to do? Was I to make a wallpaper in the back and to make some of the other works just as important as my work, or was I supposed to re-emphasize what I thought was really important for me? So what I had found when I had passed it on to someone else, they took a different take on it, and I had never thought about that.
My Inway story is a reflection of my experience taking care of my mother during the last months of her life. When I decided on this subject, I feared that the journey I was going to embark on would be difficult, but felt that it would be worth expressing through this very special venue. Creating my first 10 drawings was challenging for me because the intensity of my waiting experience was too difficult to translate into images. So in my first drawings, I just focused on some of the objects and spaces where my waiting took place. However, as we met to discuss and exchange our works, a gradual transformation of my imagery started to emerge. When we got together for the first time to share our stories and present our initial 10 works, we knew that we had created a very positive and supportive arena for a project to develop, where we address not only aesthetic issues but content and the emerging symbols that our stories inspired. The following sessions exceeded our expectations and progressively became an exhilarating communal art experience. We got to understand each other's ways of working, our personal styles expanded, we progressively used new materials and techniques and a great variety of media. We became less apprehensive about spoiling a piece, and if someone obliterated our drawing that we consider good, we accepted it as part of the process. Just as Penelope's chambermaids unraveled at night the good weaving that she had created during the day. I think that often I don't value the time that I spend waiting, and I say, oh, I can't wait for this, or I can't wait for that. However, the nature of my waiting really challenged me to be in the present because it demanded all my physical and emotional energy to get through taking care of my mom. During that time, I acted and reacted to a changing situation while my mind was filled with memories of my childhood and the stories that my mother told in her later years as a way of recounting her life. They were family tales of struggle and of love and loss, in which the act of waiting was the driving force. And these stories became a source of inspiration in my work, which translated into symbolic imagery such as objects of memories, a flower offering, beading to pass the time, hands that connect us, a light source, a passageway.
At the end, right, when you see the work all spread out, it refers back to the beginning. So the work all laid out on the table, and you start to see the relationships between all the symbols. For example, Heather Aston's knitting needles or Julie's rocking chairs, and you start to pick the symbols out. So you start to see how the different artists actually weave their work as woven through, all the work that's spread out. It becomes this visual tapestry of work. We started off with the simple idea of Penelope and the weaving of the shroud and how she unwove it at night. And, our process, 2.5 years, actually really stayed true to the original idea of ending up with this tapestry of symbols that the artist repeatedly sort of referenced in the work.
One of the things that surprised me when walking into the gallery and seeing the work installed was the sense of celebration and joy that struck me. The color, there's like bands of color wrapping around the gallery, and considering especially that these stories started out as very personal stories, and most of them were really quite sad and difficult times in the lives of the artists, I found it interesting that the end result was so markedly different. And it made me think about the handmaidens and how they kept Penelope's secret and how they protected her, and thinking about that analogy again of relating the handmaidens to the artists and how as they worked on these works of art, their mark making and smoothing over and drawing out different things. All of these processes in some way helped to soothe the pain that was involved in these stories and these events in their lives. And this sort of a collaborative process took on an even deeper meaning in that way. And I think it added another layer or depth to this project that is evident when you see the final result.